The locals had a name for it. They didn't put it on any map. They didn't need to. Everyone in Olalla, everyone on the peninsula, everyone who'd taken the ferry across Puget Sound and driven the muddy road through the Douglas firs, they all knew it by the same two words: Starvation Heights. And sometimes, when the fog was low and the wind was right, they'd see them on that road. Shuffling figures. Skeletal. Wrapped in too many clothes for the weather. Their eyes wide and searching. Hands outstretched to anyone passing. Begging. Not for money. Not for help. For food. They were her patients. The ones who had been lucky enough or desperate enough to walk away. The ones who made it back to the road. Not everyone did. This is the story of Dr. Linda Burfield Hazzard, the starvation doctor of Olalla, Washington, a woman who called herself a healer, called her methods science, called her victims cured, right up until the moment they stopped breathing. Welcome back to Echoes of Darkness, where we go where the light doesn't reach. If you're new here, subscribe. We do this every week. And if you've been here for a while, you already know this channel doesn't look away, even when it's hard, especially then. Today we're going to the Pacific Northwest, to a patch of forest above Puget Sound, to a woman who had no medical degree, no legitimate qualifications, and no hesitation whatsoever, and who for more than a decade starved her patients to death and called it a cure. We're going to Starvation Heights.
Linda Laura Burfield was born on December 18, 1867, in Carver County, Minnesota, the eldest of 7 children of a farming family. By her own account, she had a difficult relationship with conventional medicine from early childhood. Painful treatments, indifferent doctors, the kind of experiences that leave a mark. In the 1890s, she encountered the work of Dr. Edward Hooker Dewey, a physician who advocated fasting as a means of allowing the body to heal itself. For Linda, it was a revelation. She became a convert, then an evangelist, then, in her own mind at least, an authority. She began practicing as an osteopathic nurse, but she never called herself a nurse. She called herself doctor. The state of Washington, in one of the more extraordinary footnotes in American medical history, licensed her to practice medicine through a loophole that permitted some alternative medicine practitioners to operate without a degree. She exploited that loophole to the full. She wrote books, she saw patients, she built a practice, and she insisted loudly, repeatedly, with the absolute certainty of someone who has never once doubted themselves, that she was a doctor. When reporters covering her eventual trial addressed her as anything less, she snapped at them. "I have told you time and time again, it is Dr. Hazzard." Linda Hazzard to reporters at her manslaughter trial, 1912. Her theory was simple, and in its simplicity, seductive. All disease is caused by food, by the toxins that build up from eating, by the digestive system working when it should be resting. The cure, therefore, was obvious. Stop eating. Fast. Let the body cleanse itself. And if the fast went on for weeks or months, well, that was simply what a thorough cleansing required. She published this theory in 1908 in a book called Fasting for the Cure of Disease. It found an audience. The early 20th century was a golden age of wellness anxiety. Sanitariums were fashionable, fasting was discussed in serious publications, and the idea that medicine had been doing it wrong all along was enormously appealing to a certain kind of reader. There is a question that runs through this entire case, and I want to name it now so we can sit with it throughout. Did Linda Hazzard believe what she was doing was medicine? Or did she know, on some level, that she was killing people for their money? The honest answer is, we don't know for certain. What we know is what she did, and what she did is unforgivable either way. By 1907, Linda and her husband Samuel Hazzard had settled in Olalla, a tiny community on the Kitsap Peninsula, accessible from Seattle only by ferry. There, on a 40-acre tract of dense woodland, Linda established what she called Wilderness Heights, her Institute of Natural Therapeutics. The reality of Wilderness Heights bore no resemblance to the vision she sold. The sanitarium she promised, grand, restorative, set among Pacific forests, did not yet exist. What existed was a simple frame house where the Hazzards lived, and 5 small cabins that local accounts described, charitably, as barely suitable for chickens. Patients were admitted and put on the Hazzard regimen, a small cup of thin broth, tomato or asparagus, or occasionally orange juice, twice a day. Nothing else. And alongside the near-total absence of food came 2 other staples of the cure: daily enemas that went on for hours and involved up to 12 quarts of water, and massage sessions in which Hazzard, described by witnesses as wiry and stronger than the average man, beat her fists against her patients' foreheads and backs. Patients were heard crying out in pain during these sessions. They were told the pain was the toxins leaving. And while the patients fasted and weakened and lost the ability to resist, or think clearly, or remember what their life had looked like before, Hazzard moved. She asked them about their financial affairs. She offered to look after their jewelry for safekeeping. She had her attorney visit to discuss their wills. She positioned herself, gradually and with practiced ease, as the most important person in their diminishing world. The first known victim in Washington was Daisy Maud Hagrand, a local woman who died on February 26, 1908, after a 50-day fast under Hazzard's direction. She was 38 years old. She left behind a 3-year-old son named Ivar. That boy would grow up to found one of Seattle's most beloved seafood restaurant chains, a man who made his name feeding people, whose mother had been starved to death. Others followed: Ida Wilcox, Blanche B. Others whose names investigators would later piece together from death certificates, the ones signed by other doctors, which listed starvation as the cause of death. The ones Hazzard signed herself listed cancer, cirrhosis, pre-existing conditions she claimed to have discovered too late. The total number of her victims is not known. At minimum, 15, possibly significantly more. One of the things that makes the Hazzard case so disturbing, beyond the deaths themselves, is how long it took for anyone to connect the pattern. Louis E. Rader, a former state legislator, owned the property where Hazzard's sanitarium was located and died in May 1911 after treatment. Moved to a hotel near Pike Place Market when authorities tried to question him. Hazzard had already been involved with his estate. John Ivan Flux, a British patient, had come to America intending to buy a ranch. He died with $70 to his name. Eugene Wakelin, a New Zealand man, was reported to have shot himself while fasting under Hazzard's care. Hazzard had herself appointed administrator of his estate and drained it. Earl Edward Erdman, a civil engineer with the city of Seattle, died on March 28, 1910 in Seattle General Hospital after keeping a diary during his treatment that forensic investigators would later describe as a detailed, harrowing account of Hazzard's methods from the inside. He recorded everything: what he was fed, what was done to him, how he felt. He died before anyone read it as evidence. Each time a patient died, Hazzard issued a death certificate explaining it away. Each time an estate was transferred, it was via documents that patients had signed during the fast: weakened, confused, dependent, unable to refuse. Each time someone raised a concern, she dismissed it as the persecution of a woman who was simply ahead of her time. She was charismatic. She was authoritative. She looked directly at you and told you she could heal you. And people, desperately unwell people, or people who thought they were, or people who had simply run out of other options, believed her. The reckoning, when it finally came, would come because of 2 British women who should never have come to Olalla at all, and because of the woman who loved them enough to sail halfway around the world to find them. Claire and Dorothea Williamson, known to everyone as Claire and Dora, were British women in their early 30s, heirs to a substantial Australian estate worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. They were educated, well-traveled, and what you might charitably call enthusiastic early adopters of alternative health. They had already given up meat. They had given up corsets. They were, by the standards of their time and class, exactly the kind of progressive, health-conscious women who would read an advertisement in a Seattle newspaper for a fasting cure and find it compelling. They were staying at the Empress Hotel in Victoria, British Columbia, enjoying one of their regular visits to the Pacific Northwest when they saw Hazzard's book advertised. They ordered it immediately. Claire read it voraciously and became convinced that Hazzard's Institute was exactly what they needed. They did not tell their family what they were planning. The Williamson family had already made clear their disapproval of the sisters' interest in alternative medicine, and Claire and Dora had no interest in that conversation. They would simply go, take the cure, come home restored, and then no one could argue with results. In February 1911, they arrived at Hazzard's Seattle office in the Northern Bank and Trust building. They were told the sanitarium wasn't quite ready. Hazzard would treat them in the city for now. They moved into the Buena Vista apartments on Capitol Hill, and the fasting began. Within weeks, the women who had arrived in Seattle healthy, a little anxious, a little hopeful, but healthy, were barely able to walk. Their faces had become, in the words of one account, like leering skulls when they smiled. Their clothes hung on them as if they were children wearing adult garments. They fainted during the enema sessions, and a canvas sling was installed across the bathtub to catch them. And through all of this, Hazzard was busy. She'd already begun inquiries about the Williamson estate. She'd asked the sisters to hand over their jewelry, for safekeeping, she said. She had her attorney draw up a new codicil to Claire's will, leaving an annual stipend to the Hazzard Institute. Claire signed it. She was too weak to argue. She may have been too weak to fully understand what she was signing.
In April 1911, Hazzard announced the sanitarium was ready. 2 ambulances arrived at the Buena Vista apartments. Each woman was strapped to a gurney and wrapped in thick woolen blankets, not for warmth, but to hide the state of them from anyone who might see them in the street. The reality of Wilderness Heights, when they arrived, was nothing like the pastoral idyll Hazzard had described. The Grand Sanitarium was a muddy, tree-shrouded 40-acre tract, a simple frame house, 5 rough cabins, a woman who watched them with total confidence and no apparent concern. Hazzard told Claire's sister Dora that it was her dead sister's last wish that she spend the rest of her days at the sanitarium. Dora's testimony at trial remains one of the most devastating documents in the history of American criminal justice. She described watching her sister deteriorate, day by day, in the cabin next door. She described begging Hazzard for food, milk, honey, crackers, tea biscuits, and being refused each time. She described one of the few occasions she was permitted to dine with Claire. The famished Claire grew ravenous. The once dainty and well-mannered young woman was so ashamed, she begged Dora to leave her so she could suck spilled broth off her dress. Paraphrased from Dora Williamson's trial testimony, 1912. Claire Williamson died on May 18, 1911. She weighed less than 50 pounds. Before her body was cold, Hazzard had taken the diamond rings from her emaciated fingers and put them in her own jewelry box. Claire's gowns found their way into Hazzard's wardrobe. Her gold dental fillings and crowns were pulled from her teeth and sold to a local dentist. Dora, still alive but barely, was now completely isolated. Hazzard told her she was mentally unbalanced and could not care for herself. She moved to have herself appointed Dora's legal guardian, which would give her control of the entire Williamson estate, worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. There was only one thing standing between Linda Hazzard and complete success. A governess named Margaret Conway had finally gotten a telegram, and she was on her way.
Margaret Conway had received a cryptic telegram and immediately known something was wrong. The sisters had told no one where they were going, but someone, somehow, had managed to get a message out. Margaret boarded a ship in Melbourne and made the long crossing to Seattle, arriving on June 1, 1911. She was met at the dock by Samuel Hazzard, who took her directly to Linda's Seattle office. There,
Without preamble, she was told that Claire was dead and that Dora was hopelessly insane. She was taken to a mortuary and shown an embalmed body she did not recognize as Claire. Then she was taken to Olalla. What she found there shook her to her core. Dora, whom she had known since childhood, whom she had watched grow up, was a skeleton, a living skeleton wrapped in too many layers, barely able to walk, dependent on the woman who had destroyed her. Dora initially told Margaret that she was fine, that the cure was doing her a world of good, that she did not want to leave. Margaret did not believe her. She had seen Dora's eyes. Margaret Conway went to C.E. Lucian Agassiz, the British vice-consul at Tacoma. She told him everything. Agassiz, outraged, began compiling a list of every patient who had died under Hazzard's care. He found the pattern immediately. He took it to the Kitsap County authorities. On August 15, 1911, Linda Burfield Hazzard was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. Her bail was set at $10,000. She posted it the same day.
The trial of Linda Burfield Hazzard opened on January 15, 1912, and Port Orchard had never seen anything like it. The gallery was packed. Outbursts came regularly from the crowd. The judge repeatedly reminded the room that a courtroom was not a place for entertainment. Linda and Samuel Hazzard sat quietly throughout, calm, confident. Prosecutors described them as quiet and aloof, unwaveringly certain they would win. When a reporter asked Linda what she would do if the verdict went against her, she replied without hesitation, "There's no such thing as if." Linda Hazzard to a reporter during her 1912 trial. The prosecution painted a different picture. Prosecuting attorney Thomas Stevenson told the jury that Hazzard was what he called a financial starvationist, a woman who had devised a system not of healing, but of systematic theft, using starvation as the means and medicine as the cover. A serpent who trod sly and stealthy, yet with all her craft left a trail of slime. Prosecuting attorney Thomas Stevenson, addressing the jury, 1912. Dora Williamson testified. She was the key witness, the woman who had been inside Starvation Heights, who had watched her sister die, who had been manipulated and isolated and told she was insane. Her testimony was specific, detailed, and devastating. The defense called a witness who was accused of attempting to bribe a former sanitarium nurse. The British vice-consul's home was burglarized. Claire's trunk of personal papers was ransacked. Police suspected one of Hazzard's devoted supporters. After a short period of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of manslaughter. Not first-degree murder, manslaughter. It was a lesser charge than the prosecution had sought, and it would have consequences. Hazzard was sentenced to 2 to 20 years of hard labor at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla. Her medical license was revoked. She immediately began appealing. She fasted in prison. She wrote letters. She gave interviews. She maintained without a crack of doubt in her voice that she had done nothing wrong, that medicine had persecuted her, that she was ahead of her time. Supporters, genuinely, extraordinarily, wrote petitions for her release. A New Zealand petition gathered 121 names, calling her methods a boon to suffering humanity.
Linda Hazzard was released on parole on December 26, 1915, Christmas Day effectively. She had served 2 years of a potential 20. In 1916, Governor Ernest Lister granted her a full pardon on one condition: she had to leave the United States. She and Samuel moved to New Zealand. She practiced as a dietitian and osteopath. She published another book. She gave lectures. She had supporters. She was, in certain circles, still considered a visionary. In 1920, they returned to Olalla. Her medical license was never reinstated, so she operated under a different name, a school of health rather than a sanitarium. She supervised fasts. She continued to take on patients. She continued to be Linda Hazzard. Whether anyone died under her care in this second chapter has not been fully established. What is established is that she operated for 15 more years before the building itself ended it. In 1935, the sanitarium burned down. The cause was never definitively established.
The building was gone. The property fell quiet. 3 years later, in 1938, Linda Hazzard fell ill. She was in her early 70s. Her response, consistent to the very end, was to begin a fast. She died on June 24, 1938, in Olalla. The cause of death was starvation. She had written in her 1908 book that it was questionable whether in a conscious being, death has ever resulted from starvation.
I've been sitting with this case for a long time, and the thing that keeps coming back to me is not the deaths themselves, as horrifying as they are. It's the book. The book that's still available, still downloadable, still sitting in natural healing bookstores 100 years later with her name on the cover and her theories inside. Because the Hazzard case isn't just the story of one disturbed woman in one patch of Pacific Northwest forest. It's the story of what happens when authority and charisma fill a space that trust and desperation have left open. When someone speaks with total confidence about healing, and people, sick and frightened and out of options, hear certainty where there is only danger. That's not a historical problem. That's a permanent human problem. The Williamson sisters were not naive. They were educated, well-traveled, thoughtful women who read critically and made their own choices. And they still ended up in those cabins. Because the desire to believe that someone knows how to fix what's broken in you is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. Hazzard understood that. She used it without mercy. Dora Williamson survived. She returned to England. She testified at trial with extraordinary courage and precision. She lived for decades after Olalla. We do not know enough about how she processed what happened to her there, but she got on a boat, she went home, and she kept living. That matters. The other victims deserve to be named: Daisy Maud Hagland, Earl Edward Erdman, Lewis Rader, Ivan Flux, and the others whose names are in documents or on headstones or nowhere at all, who came to Wilderness Heights looking for help and found something else entirely. The road through the trees in Olalla is still there. The forest is still there. The fog still sits in the hollows. But the cabins are gone, and the frame house is gone, and Starvation Heights is only a name now, a local memory, an entry in the historical record, and the subject of a true crime book that remains the definitive account of what happened there. If you want to go deeper, Greg Olson's book Starvation Heights is meticulously researched and compellingly written. It's the book this case deserves. Thank you for being here for this one. The Hazzard case is one of those stories that changes how you see the world a little. Specifically, how you see the space between trust and danger, and how thin that line can be. If this video meant something to you, share it, leave a comment, tell me what stayed with you. This channel is built on people who want to look at the difficult things honestly, and I'm glad you're one of them. Next week on Echoes of Darkness, we go somewhere equally dark and equally human. Until then, the past is watching. Are you ready to look back?